Hello everyone and welcome to my UDK tutorial series. In this particular episode we're going to be going over height fog and fog volumes. Now I'm going to start with fog volumes because it's a little easier to understand. Basically we have three kinds of fog volumes: fog volume constant density info, fog volume linear half-space density info, and fog volume spherical density info. Now, if you're paying attention to the names, the only one that sounds the only one that makes sense by the name is the spherical density, and you would assume that to be spherical, and it in fact is. If I drag this in here, you get this like weird eagle-looking texture thing, and that is the same symbol as the wind. They just use the same symbol for wind and fogs. And if I hit F4 here, we don't have too many options, and not anything really complicated either. Just density, fog material, some different distance stuff, some colors, and a couple things having to do with translucency. Now, if I hit the game view mode button right here, I'll see the fog there. Now, the only reason that this is not already, you already can't see the fog by default is because it could, be annoying when you're working in your level and there's fog constantly hampering everything you do. So if you want to see what your fog looks like, just switch to game view. You can still edit settings even while it's like this. So right now I can change the density up to max, which is 1, and now it's almost entirely in a sphere. You can very easily see that it is in fact a sphere. And anything that I look at through this fog is going to be blurred, and the colors, you can't really see much color. And now if I go over here and look, you can see there's a lot of detailing in the meshes over here, but I can't really see all that detail very well through the fog because it's just blurring everything together. Now if I go inside of the fog here, it's going to do the same thing, just I look in every direction and all I see is just this blurredness. So now if I crank it up even higher, it's not going to do anything. 1 is the maximum opaqueness. You can't get any more opaque than fully opaque. And it's not going to ever be fully opaque, because if it was fully opaque, it wouldn't be fog. It would just be a wall. I mean, like if you made glass fully opaque, it wouldn't be glass. It would be like just a wall. It would just be like a shiny wall. And not even shiny, because that would be reflective, and that's the opposite of opaque. So, well, I mean, it's not the opposite, really. That would be translucent, but never mind. Words are confusing. So if I turn this down a little bit, the edges start blurring a little bit. You can see a little bit more detail, maybe a little bit of color. Turn it down even more. It's the same exact amount, because I'm stupid. You can see that there's a little bit of fog there, but not too much. It's just kind of a little spot that's a little different looking than the rest. You can definitely tell that there is a fog, but you can see all the colors and all the shapes and stuff of everything behind it. So basically that's what density does. Pretty self-explanatory when you're playing around with it and stuff. Now 0 would obviously be the same as just turning the fog off. So now the fog material is something that you can edit. If you want to find it in the content browser, hit the little magnifying glass and it'll just take you right to the material. I'm not going to go into editing the material because that's way over my head. I mean, the people at UDK that made the UDK engine made a basic fog material for you to play around with, and basically the way that this whole thing works is it uses that fog material on a mesh that it puts into the level for you, and it combines all of this stuff, adds some special attributes to it, and calls it a fog volume instead of a mesh with a fancy material. So, obviously enabling, disenabling, and you have your translucency options, which they didn't have much on the Unreal Wiki about exactly what this did, but if I just assume it means the same thing that it means in normal everyday talk when you're talking about translucency, which is whether or not you can see through it. And now I would assume that would have to be working with the way light is going through it, or the way it renders, or something like that. I don't really quite know what it does, because if I turn this on and off, there's really not much of a change, and if I turn this on and off, it's just disabling fog. So I would imagine that would only have to do if you had like translucent textures, like maybe water or glass or something. Then the fog might show up. I'm not entirely sure, but anyway, that's what that does. Now the approximate fog light color doesn't really do anything. You can edit it, you can change it all day long. It's not going to affect anything. Simple light color though will change the fog color. So I turn this to a, sort of an indigo-ish color. It changes everything. And now it's not going to be exactly that color because UDK is blending everything behind it with that color you specify. So it's not going to be just completely that dark blue color. It's going to kind of blend it with the stuff behind it, and it's going to fade it too, with the center being the most blue and the outside being less blue. So now start distance. I'm going to hold off on explaining start distance because I could explain it with this, but it's going to make a lot more sense when I start talking about height fog, about exactly what start distance is. So just hold off on me explaining that. Now max distance is going to be similar to start distance in being basically how far your camera is going to see the fog. Don't worry about changing this because you don't really need to change it unless you really want to get some very specific ranges of when you can see your fog. And fog volume actors, unfortunately, I've not been able to get this to work. I got it to work at one point. I don't remember what I did. For some reason, I can't seem to get it to work again. Basically, what you're supposed to be able to do is, instead of using the default mesh that they're using, because basically they're using a spherical mesh to get this spherical density info. They're just using like a spherical mesh. You can specify your own mesh to use, and it's not going to be the shape of that mesh. It's just going to basically have a spherical shape wherever it intersects that mesh. So if you have like a big pole, you could essentially have it go across half of the mesh or something, and it could be like a sphere at the sections that it intersects the mesh, or so you could essentially end up getting like half a sphere or a quarter of a sphere or something like that, depending on the way that you arrange it with the mesh. And all you really have to do is just hit the plus button here, and then just go in the content browser and add it to the list of fog volume actors. But unfortunately, I've not been able to get that to work correctly. So I apologize for not being able to show you to that on camera. And so that's basically it. You have your automatic mesh component, which you don't want to mess with because that's just the default mesh that it uses. And it has to have some kind of mesh to know what the shape of it is. So, because it's essentially applying this material to a mesh. So, anyway, now all of the fog density volumes are going to have those same options. We have 3 of them. So we have the constant density, which is a cube. And keep in mind that you can rotate all of these. You can scale them up. So, the cube one you could have is like a prism, or, whatever you want. You can scale it up on different sides and rotate it and all this kind of stuff. Now, the linear half space is different. It's sort of like a cube. By default, it's a little smaller than a cube, and it's shorter. Basically, it just, instead of being like having like a cube mesh and filling that entire cube mesh with fog, it basically creates like a plane, and wherever the plane is, which is going to be at the bottom section, I'll actually drag this out here so you can see what I'm talking about. Let me get rid of this other one. Darn it. Set the density up. There we go. Okay. So basically we have the plane is going to be here at the bottom, sort of, and at the plane itself, the fog density is 0. And then right above the plane it's going to be 1, and then it fades off to, however high you have it set, and it fades off into 0 again. So it's not so much a cube as it is sort of like a line of where your fog is, except it's not a line because it's 3D space, so it's a 2D plane. Anyway, it would be a line if we were working in 2D space. But anyway, that's aside from the point. It's the cube is just it's sort of like 1 density, and I know that I have it set to 1 density. If I had it set to like 0.5 density, the density value that you assign is more of like a scale value, and even if you set it to a really, really low value, at some point it's scaling that value 1 down to something else, and it's scaling all of the other numbers down with it. So when I have it set to 1, it's going to be 1, and then it's going to be 0.00, 0.9999999, and then 0.9999998, 0.9999997. Of course, if you multiply that by like 0.5, then it'll be all of those values. So I'm just using 1, 0, 1 as just, default values, so don't get confused by the different numbers here. Anyway, tangent, sorry. I apologize for that. Anyway, back on track. It starts at 0, then it goes to 1, and then fades back to 0. The cube and the sphere, the outsides are 0, and it fades into 1. So that's sort of how the linear half space is different. It's not fading from 0 to 1. It's sort of like starts at 1 and fades to 0. So if I look back at this, you can see 0, 1, then to 0 again. And the edges fade with it as well. And again, it's a plane, so it can appear as a cube sometimes. But it does actually look different than the cube, because the cube is faded at both edges. It gets thicker in the center. So one side is thicker than the other side. So this is useful for if you want to have like a sort of a misty forest floor. So it fades up towards the ceiling of the canopy of the trees, instead of being thicker in the center, which would be more towards the trunk of the trees instead of the canopy. That's just an example I came up with off the top of my head. Not the best of examples, but an example. And there's a bunch of fancy, really long definition of it on the UDN that I was going to read, but I'm like, you know what? That's just more confusing than it's worth, so hopefully my explanation makes sense. And it has the same options as the spherical density. All 3 of the fog volumes have the same exact options. So, and just to verify this, I'll click on this, and you can see. Well, okay, so it has a half space plane, but that's just affecting where the plane itself is at, the exact coordinates of it, so that you can change that up. That's the only thing that's different. All right. Oh, it's a long spiel. I got to take a little break. I was talking quickly. Oh, apologies. All right, delete that. Now, height fog, very different. This goes throughout the entirety of the level. Now, it does sort of work off of height a little bit. So if I place this in, like right there, and then switch to game view, you'll see, well, okay, that's not the best of examples. Let me turn up the density a little bit, 0.0009. Oh, that's really thick. Add another 0, shall we? Now it's too many zeros. I guess that's okay. So, I mean, it does sort of work off of heights. Let me see if I can try and lower this some and get it to where it's going to display correctly. There. Okay. Now it's working. So, see, I lowered it enough, and it's actually stopping right here. I don't know the exact distance of how far it goes up before cutting off. I can't tell you that. I'm sure it says something on the wiki, but it cuts off right, you know, at the edges of these towers and stuff. So, you know, if I'm looking out on this bridge that's over here, if I get up here, actually should probably raise this up a bit. Where did it go? It's all the way down there. So I'll raise it up a little bit. There we go. So if I'm looking out over here, I can see it's like a sea of fog. If I went down there, I would be in the fog. Right now I'm not in the fog. I can just look out and see the fog. But it's going out infinitely in every direction except for up. Now it's infinitely going down. So if I were to put this all the way up at the top of the you know, the sky map or something, the entire level would be completely immersed in fog, and I could not get away from it going down. But it's going to be 0, and then it's going to be, you know, maximum thickness pretty much everywhere. There's no like fading in anywhere. There's no fading in anywhere. It's going to be 0, 1. Density wise. Now obviously I have it to set to 0.0005. That's the, you know, that's the multiplier value of the fog density. But at any rate, that's one thing that the height fog is going to be useful for, is so that it's a very different feel, because it's going to be a constant density throughout the entirety of the level. If you used a fog volume, there would be some fading to it in certain portions. But if you use the height fog, there is no fading. It's a constant fog all over the place, even inside buildings. Okay? Now, that is, of course, one thing you have to decide. Do I want to take the time to set up fog volumes throughout the entirety of my level so that there is no fog inside buildings? Because, you know, even if you have fog outside, heavy fog outside, there is no fog in buildings, ever. Unless you have really bad ventilation, and the fog is getting inside. But even then, because it's air conditioned, it kind of disperses it because of the way physics works, and that's getting off on a completely different tangent than what we should be talking about. Ah, nerd. Okay. Sorry, that's 2 in 1 video. I'm really bad. Okay, anyway, you kind of have to make that decision on your own and on what you want to do. But if you do want to be able to have fog throughout the entirety of your level, this is one way to go. Now, of course, you're probably sitting there thinking, well, I want to have like a lot of mountains and stuff in my level, and I don't like how it just cuts off all of a sudden. Well, that's what the exponential height fog is for. It has a fading with the height wise. Basically, it's sort of an upgraded version of the height fog. Now, there are cases where you want to use both, because this whole thing where it cuts off can be useful if you're doing like some kind of level where there's a lot of clouds and stuff. You could use the fog as like clouds themselves, and that you go below the cloud canopy or something, and then come back up, because clouds don't fade. There's just like, okay, cloud, stop, no cloud, you know. So you could use it in that regard. So there are cases for using both. That's why they have both. But I'll get to the exponential height fog and show you the difference after we go over these settings here. So density you've already seen, enabled, disabled, pretty simple. Light brightness. Now, this and the light color go sort of hand in hand. So if I increase this or decrease it to 0, it's going to look like that. Now there is still a fog, but the brightness of it is very, very low. Now no matter what color you have, it's still going to look like this. Now keep in mind the orange, I don't know what the orange is coming from. Probably a combination of all the different colors we have out there, but I don't know what that's really coming from. That's not the fog itself. But if I change this to like a blue or something color, it's not going to change anything. Now if I turn this brightness up to 1, it's going to be like a very light piercing blue, and the white, you know, will be that. If I do 0.05 and go back to the blue, there's that. So it's affecting mostly a lot of areas with shadow where you can really see the fog, especially, you know, where the light is coming in. But you can play around with the brightness and the color to get exactly what you want with the fog. So I'm going to do like 0.04 or whatever it is that they had. I don't remember. Okay. Now, start distance. I said I would get back to this. Extinction distance, don't mess with, because that's just basically at what point, if I'm looking out, you know, at what point does the fog end? And assuming that you can see, I don't even know how many zeros that is, like 1 billion world units or something out, then the fog would stop, and it wouldn't render past that. Assuming you could see that far in your level, then you might want to change that, but really just don't mess with it. Now, the start distance is basically how long it takes for the fog to start showing itself. Think of it like, sort of if you're walking, you know, in really heavy fog, sort of like the distance as a sphere around you that you can see completely clearly without the fog, you know, preventing you from seeing any further. If you set this to like a really short distance and then really increase the density, it becomes really apparent. So I'm going to go do that now. I'm going to increase this density to 1. So that is, okay, this has got to go down. And change the color to something else. What is causing that? Okay, okay, that's not what was supposed to happen. Alright, I don't know why that just happened, but at any rate, let's go down here and mess around with this. Okay, so actually, you know what? I'm gonna drag the height fog up some. That'll just make it easier. Okay, there. Alright, so we've got this fog here, and it's everywhere. Now, if I set the start distance to, like, I don't know, 1,000, all of a sudden there's an area in front of me that I can see. And if I move around, this area is going to follow me. Let me move some of this stuff out of the way. This will follow me around, and I can see within a certain radius. And it is a sphere around me. Okay, so it's like a spherical area around me that I can see. So, you know, even inside the buildings and everything. And one thing about this that is useful is you can use this if you're having like system performance issues. You can use this to de-render things. So I don't know if I can get some of this stuff to do it right, but if let me play around with the start distance actually. Alright, so there. If I back out, at some point, there. So right now, behind that fog, it's de-rendering a lot of that stuff. If I go back in, oh well, maybe it's not. I know something around here it was de-rendering. One of these things. It's de-rendering some of this stuff as you at a certain distance and with the fog. Okay, so see that right in there? You can see inside the room right now because it's de-rendering the wall. So now it's kind of popping back into existence. So that right there. So it de-renders the wall. You can see into the room, and then you come in. So some of that de-rendering stuff is already there, and you can use the fog to complement that, so that you could even set it farther or closer to the player, but it'd be okay because you can't see it because of the fog anyway. So that's one thing that can be useful to the level maker, is the ability to have something like that. To have, I mean, you can make it like a config option. You know, if people are having quality performance issues, to be able to change it so that it cuts down on on the amount of things that are currently rendered at one time. But at any rate, that's sort of how the start distance works. It's just basically the distance from the camera that the fog starts rendering at. And again, you set it to 0, and there will be no distance at all. I mean, it can be used for several other things, not just, I mean, sometimes if you set this to just maximum, like a 1 or something, you won't really be able to see anything around you. You won't even know it's fog. It could just be like some kind of cool force field thing or something. I don't know. Because I'm sure you can do a lot of cool things with fog and Kismet. I haven't really tried it much, but I imagine it has some Kismet plugins. Alright. Now, I am not sure if I have this fog still selected or not, or is that it? Yes, it is. Okay, delete. So you saw what it looked like, the way it like kind of cut off dramatically. If I grab the exponential height fog and show you this. Whoops. I gotta drag it down a little more. It's about there, and I'm gonna also increase the density to 1. Hit G. And now you can see it's still displaying all the way up here, despite the fact that I gave it a I set it way down below. Now if I move all the way down here, it's displaying down here as well. So the height has less to do with the exponential height fog. It's not really affected as much by the height positioning as much as the other height fog. So it's more of like of something that you could use at any height, really. It'll just display at any height. Let me move it down some more, just to make sure that that is in fact what's going on, and it's not just goofing off and screwing with me. Yeah, so there we go. Now another thing that the exponential height fog actually has, as in addition to displaying at any height really, is the fact that now it does have a height fall off, so you can use this. If I set this to 0, actually, that will make it sort of like the other height fog, just the normal height fog. So let me drag this back up because I forgot about that option. So now it's not really displaying anything at all right now. So if I set the height fall off to like 0.1, 0.001, 0.00001. Okay, so now we can see something. We've got a very, I'm not sure why this is that's glitching like it is. Okay, so here's what's going on. I've got it set too low, but essentially this is the point at where the normal height fog would cut off, right? So you can see we've got shade and color, right? We've got one shade, next shade, next shade, next shade of the density. And so this is essentially the point where the height fog would normally just cut off, except the exponential height fog then goes and above that and starts doing the same thing. So it has a point where it kind of goes from infinitely below up to a certain height and hits 0 and then starts going back up again. That's kind of what we've got going on right here. Hopefully that makes sense. And the height fog, this option, the fall off, kind of affects how that works. So that just kind of affects the value of the fall off of the height. So high density factor controls how the density increases as height decreases. So basically, the lower you are, the denser it is, basically. That's what I read that as. But the max opacity of the fog you could set to 0.5, and then that kind of clears some of this up. So basically it gets thicker the lower you go down, but you can set a maximum opacity. So you have a lot more control over the exponential height fog than you do any of the others. You have the start distance again, the light terminator angle, which I don't think does too much. Oh. Okay, so that's the angle, correct? 50 degrees. Okay, so that's just, I guess, affecting sort of the brightness, or not the brightness, because there's options for that. Let's see. Okay. Well, I guess it has to do... I'm not entirely sure exactly what this is affecting. But at any rate, that's an option that has to do with the color of the light. And the angle of the dominant directional light and how all that works. Because really the exponential height fog uses whatever direction that the dominant directional light is facing, which is in this case represented by the big sun, and has one color. The other color is over here. So there's one color facing the light and one color facing away from the light. And you can affect both of those. So this, you can set them the same color if you don't really want that separate color thing, but this is very useful if you have like a sunset and there's fog. Because if you look out like over the beach and there's a sun setting on the ocean, you'll have like one color as the light. And if you look backwards at the moon maybe rising up in the distance, you'll have another color represented by that moonlight. And they'll blend together sort of in the middle, which is what we have kind of going on here. And you can set the brightnesses of both of those separately and the colors of both of those separately. So the exponential height fog allows a lot more customability, but again it has its weak points in that it has fog pretty much everywhere, no matter what height you go to. Height fog can be used, you know, if you want to set a limit to that fog height. So that is basically my entire spiel on fog. Hopefully that made sense to everybody. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. If you have any suggestions on how I could do my videos better, or suggestions for future videos, I'm happy to hear that as well. I always read as many comments as I can. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video.